Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 791. How? What are you so worried about? I'm here, aren't I? Slow curse of burden confusion, Beam Ray exclaimed and threw a slew of curses at the boss to slow it down. They were moderately effective, but it didn't stop the boss from advancing. Here, let me try, Allison said and started a chant. When she finished, the water around them was suddenly filled by tiny lightning arcs. She had cast the spell Static Field, which had a high chance to paralyze an opponent. When it reached the boss, he twitched for a moment, but quickly kept advancing. Jonah also wanted to help, but the maddening evil eye wasn't useful to stop someone, and he doubted the fearful evil eye would work on the enraged boss. He was thinking wildly, but the problem was that Jonah didn't know telepathy and couldn't communicate with Tryx, who controlled her curses and the illusion magic. Stop thinking so chaotically. I will curse it if it's close enough, he heard the annoyed mask. Piercing Cascade Shay used his other hand to swing the trident and shoot 3 destructive torrents at the boss. Under the water, their power was visibly increased and they easily ripped a chunk out of the place that would be its thighs, exposing the bright molten core. Any other time, this would have been a negligible wound, but with the ocean of water quickly drawing out and hardening his molten body, Maltus was not only stopped from healing himself but lost his heat even quicker for a moment, as shown in a big chunk of health quickly vanishing after Shay's attack. Monique had constantly observed and noticed that the loss was bigger for as long as the wound had not hardened. That's it. Keep hurting it. The wound increased the freezing damage and cooled it off quicker. Monique explained and threw Athena's spear, an attack skill that allowed her to create and throw spears made of spear aura. Jonah followed her example, but what worked great for Shay's skill, hindered theirs. The mass of water hindered their attacks, stopping them from dealing any damage comparable to Shay's initial strike. Maltus kept drawing closer like an inevitable force until he suddenly stopped in place. They could hear dampened chortling noises from the massive creature as it started undulating rhythmically. Soon a slurping was added and it undulated faster, making its cooled shell crack all over. What is going on? The party thought to themselves, astonished at the sudden turn of events. You are welcome, Jonah heard the smug voice say in his head. General of Fire, Maltus leave -- boss. Health 430/1000. Status. Freezing, burdened, slowed, dreaming, curse. It's caught in the curse of my mask, Jonah explained to the others. Wait, wasn't the soul of your mask that of a succubus? Doesn't that mean the boss is currently? Allison didn't speak it out loud, but it was enough for them all to come to the same conclusion. With an awkward expression, they collectively made a step back. Even Shay. Everyone stared at him in shock, since he was supposed to make sure the ring spewed its water outside the barrier. Good news, the ring finished, the water mage answered their concerned gazes. They heaved a sigh, for more than one reason. This also meant, their strongest asset in water environment battles was free to help them once the boss got out of the illusion. None of them harbored any thoughts of the boss being trapped in the illusion until it died. Yet, nobody wanted to risk waking it up. They all just watched its health tick down in wordless agreement, preparing for the moment it would go escape the status effect. It was awkward to watch the boss engage in unspeakable behaviors all on its own, but they didn't dare to look away. When its health fell below a quarter, it suddenly halted. For a fraction of a moment, they could see deep red cracks all across its body before a huge explosion occurred surrounding it. As if it self-destructed, fire and smoke expanded from the place it stood. The shock wave ripped away several of the shields Allison had set up until only Tekker's barrier was left. The water outside had gotten murky from all the smoke and there was no for them to see what was going on. Everyone bottoms up. Just in case, Monique gave the signal to drink the potion Allison had given out. They allowed them to breathe underwater, in case the shield really broke. As if waiting for this, the sound of a gong ringing shattered their ears, as a massive fist crashed into their barrier. There was no signal needed for this. Everyone started attacking in the direction where the attack came from. Maltus was not fast, especially not in water. But there was no feedback. They couldn't see his status, nor the boss itself. Let's me try something, Shay said belatedly like he suddenly had an idea he should have had sooner. He started waving his hands in a circular movement, resembling radio calisthenics. The water outside started moving a whirl around the barrier. They all realized that Aquakinesis Leave 5 was nothing to scoff at, as whirlpool was generated around them, giving them at least some viewability outside the barrier. Just in time, their barrier rang again like a bell. A fist made of bright fire had smashed into the barrier. It belonged to a figure clad in a whale of bubbles and smoke. General of Fire, Maltus Leave -- Boss. Health 180/1000. Status, Enraged, Burning, Freezing. The figure was half the size of the original boss, but it vanished quickly back into the dark flood, where they were unable to see it anymore. They all came to similar conclusions. Maltus had shed a great part of its body and was burning its life force in exchange for speed and power. It seemed like the boss had become desperate to end this underwater battle as quickly as possible. This led the party to do the only logical move. Sit it out. The boss is on his last legs. That form is quickly burning his life force in addition to the freezing. Let's bleed him out. Tekker, can you strengthen your barriers further? Allison, Shay, and Ray set up all the barriers and shields you have. Shay, do you think you could cool down the water around us further? Monique gave her orders. Allison was able to set up a shield of any element as a wizard, but she had an even better idea she suggested to Monique. Maltus was pressed for time. He had to accept that his mighty and glorious body was useless when faced with a battler below water. Many challengers had fallen to his tactics of hiding in the massive magma sea in the boss room, but nobody had ever summoned an ocean on his head. Had he stubbornly held onto his vanity, he would have just gone out like a candle, unable to even put up a real fight. So he had shed his cumbersome shell in exchange for speed and power, even opting to burn his life to quickly end this fight. The water kept pulling the energy out of him, but with his body made of fire, it was unable to touch or slow him now. He just had to break the barrier and these challengers would be at his mercy. Once it was over, the door of the boss room would open and the water would be drained. Maltus had never felt desperation ever since he became the guardian of the fire key. Now he remembered the fight of his youth when he was forced to fight for his life in the dungeon conquests. His fist became faster and faster and he drummed against the barrier to break it. Although he was suspicious, since the challengers were no longer attacking him from the inside, he had to keep going, while his life was slowly ticking away. 100/1000, he increased his efforts and cracks formed on the surface. 90/1000, the shields broke and the barrier was on its last legs. 80/1000, the barrier broke under his boiling fist and Maltus was ready. He immediately fired his strongest skills, turning the place where the barrier had stood into a cooking area of molten stone. 70/1000, there were no signs of the challengers. Everything was evaporated. Yet, the gates of the boss room stayed closed. 60/1000, what happened? Why were the gates not opening? Were they still alive? They had to be. He had not gotten a notification of a kill. But where were they? 50/1000, time was running out, what was he supposed to do? They couldn't have vanished. 40/1000, had the water gotten colder? He felt his life leaving quicker, all of a sudden. 30/1000, no, it couldn't be. Would he really end like this? How embarrassing, would his path to greater heights be cut short by this humiliation? 20/1000, maybe there was a chance to survive? Maltus wanted to dive into the spot of magma, created by his attack. It was shameful, but maybe he could breach the hardened top of the magma and find some heat below. 0/1000, before he could try to dive into the ground. He was suddenly hit by a wave of attacks that wiped out what was left of his health in one go. How, was his last thought before he disintegrated. Chapter 792 Somewhere Else, 22. Epsilon, Northeast Earth. Are we still walking in the right direction? He asked the men in the back as he pulled his sword from the corpse of a beast. Yes, but are you sure the information is true? We have been traveling for days without finding a trace of living people, one of his companions complained. Right, the best thing we came across were those abandoned ruins. Another added, annoyed. Shut up, we aren't just looking for that ominous settlement. We are primarily looking for the source of the demonic beasts that keep attacking the camp, he scolded them. However, he couldn't help but agree. One of the other sects with connections had gotten a quite detailed map of the land from some of the locals. According to it, there was another of the settlements they called districts to the northeast of the connection between this world and the voracious cloud continent. Originally, they planned to make contact after their bridgehead in this world was fully set up and the connection between the continents was stabilized. Things changed when their construction efforts were under the constant threat of weird monsters attacking them from this direction. Wave after wave, they kept coming without a pause. The delegation of the allied sects was able to withstand, but their construction was halted. Finally, he and his men were sent to find the source of these creatures. "We still have no clue about that either, Captain," someone called from behind. "Stop whining, I thought I was traveling with the Silver Sparrows squad, not a bunch of chirping chicks." Using stealth techniques, they had been mostly evading the groups of beasts they met on the way, only fighting those that managed to detect them. One thing became clear: the waves that hit their base were not targeted attacks but were owed to the fact that this place was overflowing with monsters. "Okay, stop whining. We will keep going for another few hours before setting up camp," he ordered the squad. With light steps, they traveled through the treetops further north, but they didn't get far before the leader suddenly heard a scream. He quickly turned around, his sword had already left the sheath. Before he could see it, the stench of sulfur wafted at his nose. "ONT," he ground below, knowing at the neck of the corpse of one of the silver sparrows was a red dwarf. A deformed creature, like a shaved monkey with a crooked nose and goat horns, was ripping a chink of meat out of the man's throat. "Kill that thing!" His order was unnecessary. The group of sparrows had already attacked in a sword formation, but the red monkey managed to evade their coordinated attack, fleeing back into the treetops. To its misfortune, the leader already waited for it, beheaded the smelly thing with a sword ray. Its corpse fell to the ground, lying beside the man it had managed to kill and his grim-looking companions. "Just what is that thing?" one of the men asked while pushing the corpse with his sword. This was already the third man they lost on this trip. They had seen a bunch of outlandish beasts on their way, but none had been covered in such a dark aura. He bent down to examine the head he cut off, and it still emanated this kind of power which reminded him of demonic energy. "Leader, watch out," he heard and saw a blade coming in his direction. The moment the man called him, he elegantly stepped to the side, evading the blade and the attack of another red monkey that had suddenly emerged from the shadows. The blade that was aiming at him passed by and slashed the monkey. "Whatever these things are, they have some kind of stealth in the darkness, even I can't sense," he admitted calmly. "We should stay in the light from now on, even if it makes us more easily detectable. Since these things had better stealth than them, it was better to risk something than being picked off in the shadows." Carefully, everyone watching each other's backs, they continued their journey. More and more creatures emitting this weird aura appeared in the forest. Not all of them were as bothersome as the red monkeys, though each was a deformed insult of nature on its own. A herd of creatures shaped like a ball, with 2 legs and 2 giant bullhorns passed below them, as they hid in the trees. They saw spindly things, like tall slender men but gaunt like corpses died of starvation. They witnessed those things fighting a group of boars using a breath of dark fire and illogical strength. Their worst experience, they had with a humanoid covered in ugly bulging muscles. It too had a pair of twisted horns on his head and a misshapen face not even a mother could love. A child like this, he had no doubt anyone would rather drown it than see it grow up. Aside from its face that posed a challenge to look at, its physical prowess was tremendous, comparable to a body cultivator in the late stages of the Golden Core stage. They all had to fight in formation just to keep it in check. Some of them lost their weapons when they started covering their hands in the same fire that the other creatures had breathed. After a long perilous fight, they managed to kill it with 1,000 cuts. Exhausted, they had no other choice but to rest and recover their energy afterward. They found a small hill and dug a cave in its side to rest. He used his formation flags to set up a basic illusion formation to keep them from being found while resting. "I will take the first shift," he said, allowing the other to sit down and meditate. He on the other hand kept watch on the forest outside, in case something able to see through his formation would appear. During this time he saw many more groups of these creatures pass by. His heart started racing when another of those bulky monsters stopped right in front of their cave. For several seconds he stared right into its beady evil eyes, but the thing didn't stare back. After a while, it turned back round and left. Watching the outside, he finally knew the reason for the waves of beasts. Everything was running from these monsters clad in demonic energy. He started to worry about what would happen to the base if these things reached it. They could deal with the beast, but he wasn't sure whether they could deal with these exotic foes unless the fortifications were finished. For now, he had to hope that the few nascent soul powerhouses would make a move when the base was about to fall. "Are we really continuing? Shouldn't we better return and warn them about these things?" one of the men asked when he told them that they would continue forward. "We aren't marginally faster than those things. By the time we arrive, they will probably already know about them. Contrary, we should look for the place they came from. The beasts running from the monsters is one thing, but why are these monsters migrating?" Only silence answered him. Obviously, none of them knew why, so they agreed that finding out the reason was more important now than to try and return to the bridgehead. As such they continued moving in the direction of Epsilon until, finally, the skyline of man-made structures appeared on the horizon. But that wasn't all. In the sky they saw a huge airship floating above the vast city. The architecture was weird and foreign, but it could compare in size with some of the provincial capitals in their home. They stood with their mouths wide agape, watching the scene. Not because airships and high structures were imposing to them. No, it was that the airships were carpet-bombing the city with terrifying explosions that even swallowed the massive buildings. Each explosion has the power of a foundation stage or early golden core expert self-destructing. On the ground, they saw the hordes of monsters fleeing from the city like rats from a sinking ship and flowing into the woods. Now they knew why they were migrating. Chapter 793 Orb of Dusk. Ding! You have killed Shadow of Dusk. Leave 115, boss, you have earned experience. A figure enveloped in flowing shadows disintegrated to ashes in his hand. Seth let out a deep sigh. This had been the most annoying fight so far. It was not necessarily dangerous, but the enemy had almost perfect stealth that made it even hard for Thia's vision to detect. He even had to hide Tatzel, since the Emuji was in danger to be hit by its surprise attacks. The blacksmith had crossed another 10 bridges before he found this second boss. At least it was a good fight for Seth to get closer acquainted with the peculiarities of the draconic titan flame and the salamander flame. Seth was about to curse that the boss had not dropped anything when he saw a glint in its burned remains. It was actually an item similar to the storm sphere Seth had found once. Orb of Dusk, crafting material. Relic. 1 plus 200% power in Twilight. 2 trait, Acolyte of Dusk. 3 plus 150% power to Shadow Magic. 4 plus 100% power to Light Magic. 5 plus 75% power to Surprise Attacks. 6 active skill, Prism Escape. 7 active skill, Shadow Form. An orb with the powers of dusk, used by someone who had stepped on the path of legends. Once this orb becomes widely known or plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item has a high chance to become legendary. The flavor text was a little short, but Seth didn't mind. It was the first relic-rated material he found in this dungeon and it was also possible to directly use it as an item. The only problem was to find someone who would have the greatest use of it. There were a few parts that fit a shadow mage like Mina was, but all options were tailored to someone using both, magic of light and shadow. Not to mention that Mina specialized in the role of an assassin, not a mage, even when the latter was her secondary class. For now, he had nobody in mind who could make full use of the item's options. Shadow's form offered not just stealth, but also immunity to attacks as long as the user stayed hidden. Prism Escape turned the user in bright rays of light that enabled them to escape an attack. The trait, Acolyte of Dusk, was the reason the boss looked like he was made of flowing shadows. This form allowed it to absorb the power of light, strengthen the power of shadow, and decreased physical damage by 50% because it turned the person into a semi-solid creature. The only way to deal full damage was when it had to solidify to attack. It would have been a powerful trait if it wasn't for the fact that it didn't lower magic or elemental damage. Ever since the Mirror of Dawn, the bottomless gorge had kept becoming brighter and brighter with every bridge he crossed. The lower he came, the closer he got to the mysterious light source. He found it a little weird that he met the Shadow of Dusk after the Mirror of Dawn without coming across any night. Maybe it was because of the power of the orb, since the trait absorbed light, the Shadows of Dusk was stronger, closer to the light. Seth's thoughts also derailed and for a moment he suspected it could be a stupid play on the proverb "the night is the darkest right before dawn" or something like that. Aside from the orb, the boss also dropped a big soul with affinities for shadow and light magic, but nothing special about it. It would fit well with the orb, but Seth was sure he could find something better at Tanomol's place. It was objectively worse than the Soul of Dawn he got earlier. Checking his experience, Seth saw in delight that the boss had given him a whopping 20% on his way to level 95. Bringing him to level 94 with about 60% of the experience bar filled. The mobs on the past 10 floors had been less numerous but had given a much better experience. It was just a shame, Seth had been unable to share the experience with Tatzel this time. The Emuji had reached level 75 and had grown by a lot. His maximum size was now comparable to the juvenile Titanoboa that had been Seth's first great battle. However, unlike Puffles, the Great, Tatzel was able to instinctively control his size. Tatzel's stats were nothing to scoff at, especially its intelligence and willpower, were closing in on 700. Its physical skills were roughly the same as Seth's base attributes, clearly identifying the emoji as a caster and not a vanguard. This was also the reason why the boss had constantly evaded Seth and tried to kill the snakelet. "Don't worry, Mom. When I'm older, I will be able to fend for myself," Tatzel huffed when he noticed his thoughts. "I don't doubt that." "Not at all," Seth answered it with a smile. Even though Tatzel grew quicker thanks to the rise in level, he was still a snakelet. It would grow stronger once it actually matured. Aside from its natural growth, the emoji had also gained a lot of passive skills as his level rose, which would turn him tough as a nail in the future once their levels rose. Tatzel's row of resistance skills was just as long as Tekker's, albeit their levels and effects were still lower. "Let's keep going then." Seth recalled the emoji from the pet space and they continued their way even further down. The creatures that now appeared were a mix of copies of the Mirror of Dawn and the Shadow of Dusk. They were just elite versions, but Seth started to feel the pressure. One was equipped with the basic resistances to counter all of his skills, which meant he had to hit it very often. The other was really good at dodging, which also meant he had to hit at it very often. They also kept flying around, which made it hard to get any drops or souls from them. Altogether this made the fights long, tedious, and unrewarding, except for the experience. Seth kept his mood during the continuous grinding through one simple thought. He may have had a hard time beating them, but just how frustrating would it be for them to fight him? Seeing their attacks do nothing, even if they managed to hit him? The blacksmith could simply rely on his legendary armor to tank all the damage. Even if some went through due to some ultimate attack, it would heal naturally, or his golden fleece could simply heal him. All these tenacious, high-level warriors with cheat-like traits and decades of training, backed by the power of the dungeon, but he was the one they had to fear. Seth was tempted to let Ounce and Gliobum play his very own boss music as they descended further and further into Madna the dungeon. However, he didn't. He resisted the temptation, in case there was another boss with a power like Angeliquez. Seth didn't want to meet a Mirror of Dawn that had almost complete resistance to everything he could throw at her. That was a battle of attrition he could go without. From this point, the place became significantly brighter with every bridge they came across. The bridges also went through a change. But they did not become even more glorious, but they started showing signs of bleaching and crumbling. New opponents appeared soon. Ray of the Day Leave 98, Elite. They looked a lot like Angelique, winged pale people using powerful light skills and magic to try and destroy the bleached and crumbling bridges. They were numerous, fast, and had powerful attacks. To their dismay, Seth was even more invulnerable to light, thanks to Puffle's materials. "Amateurs," was Puffle's on comment on the situation as Seth and Tatzel wiped the floor with the rays and continued on. With fewer shadows and mirrors, they even became quicker, since the rays of day were glass cannons. The heat also started rising as they got lower. In addition, the metal railing and other parts of bridges started showing signs of deformation. Can't be long before we meet the next boss now. Chapter 794 Solar Solace. It actually took them another 25 floors of increasingly stronger light creatures before another boss appeared. But this was not just any boss, it was the boss. The end boss of this dungeon. The emoji and the blacksmith stepped into a place full of light and heat. Solar Solace Leave boss. It has been a long time since someone reached my abode, the boss greeted him in a warm benevolent voice. They had now reached the bottom of the chasm the bridges had constantly crossed. The past few bridges were barely solid enough to walk, while the heat and brightness had gotten so overwhelming that Seth had a hard time seeing. He always was a dark mode person, personally. Now he was facing the source of all the light, sitting cross-legged on a crystal platform. It was a 5-meter-tall man, wearing light skimpy robes that revealed the toned muscle underneath. It was totally Alzalsar's type if all the light didn't make him hard to look at. Why are so many high-level bosses so talkative? Well, you can't expect everyone to be a mindless beast that attacks anyone in its sight, the bright man answered with a benign smile. It would make everything a lot easier if you just attacked me, Seth replied honestly. Simply attacking someone who was peacefully sitting down and talking to him felt weird. Oh, don't worry. I will make sure to attack and kill you after our little tea party. I just thought it would be a good chance to find out more about my future kingdom. It was the same warm, friendly voice, but what it said was far from friendly or warm, to the point that Seth even raised an eyebrow. His qualms were slowly melting. Your future kingdom? You wouldn't be talking about Earth, right? You probably mean this dungeon land. Earth? What a funny name. I will have to change it once I create my eternal kingdom here. Are there many humans like you? Solar Solace completely ignored Seth's biting tone. Like me. Small, smelly, garish, and witless. Small, well compared to the boss, sure. Seth also couldn't deny that he had been running around and fighting in the dungeon for a day without even using life magic to clean himself. He could see himself being called garish, but witless? Well, fine, but he was average so. A lot actually. He decided to pass on the insult and call the whole populace of Earth short, smelly, garish, and witless. That's a problem. I might have to pyrolyze this world then, to get rid of the stains, the boss mumbled. At this point, Seth was glad the boss had kept talking. All of his qualms were gone. Even if it brought out a legendary item, Seth would allow this boss to buy its life. Big words for someone who can't even take over the abyss, much less step out of this dungeon. Haha, how cute. Do you even know how many dungeons in the abyss are under my control? It's not that we can't step out, it's because we are still not done harvesting this place, it said with a wave of his hand. So you are using the abyss to grow your forces, Seth concluded from his words. Dungeons grew from the energy of the land, and so did the monsters inside. It wasn't stupid at all to take their time and grow their armies with the power in this place, before coming over the rest of the world like locusts. He would do the same. Those are great news, the blacksmith exclaimed. What? Solar Solace asked surprised. The more of you weaklings are running around, the easier it is to farm experience. By all means, please make sure that there are enough of you for everyone, the bard spoke, his voice oozing with demonic power. Voice of Seth finally shook the benign facade Solar Solace had put up. The brightly shining face like that of a benevolent god, distorted into a displeased grimace. You arrogant worm, it shouted. Don't call out my pet like that. Puffles may be arrogant, but he is also cool. Hey! Thanks, the Ivisor wanted to protest but ended up thanking him. What nonsense are you talking about? It asked, angry and confused. You shouldn't anger my pet, he would teach you a thing or two about how to use light the right way, threatened the boss with Puffles. Yet. Let me at him, the nightmare centipede was locked and loaded. Sorry, Puff, but I'm not sharing this one. I've had enough. A fiery wave of blazing light washed over Seth, not harming the bard in the least. Oh, now you want to fight, the bard called out, amused. He waved his giant's rod and penetrated Solar Solace with a row of earth spikes using quick cast. However, the boss just laughed as the spikes penetrated him without dealing any visible damage. He floated in the air, mockingly. Ha ha ha, what now? I'm light, you can't hurt me like that. Your fire, your magic, your weapons, I saw them all from here. They are useless against me. What now, will you sing me a tune, little canary? Solace jeered at the blacksmith with a big grin. Don't be so hasty, Seth said with a grin and started firing a single earth spike from the spear/staff. The boss didn't even bother dodging and started chanting a spell. Yet, when the third spike passed through, Solar Solace suddenly fell to the ground, pulled by an invisible force. Pirithous Bind had triggered and bound the boss to the ground. With a force based on Seth's strength of almost 700 points, with an equipment bonus, Solace was glued to the ground. What is this sorcery? He screeched, trying to pick himself up, but was unable to do so. Seth had hoped to impede his movement and then try several things to see what could deal the most damage to the angel, but he had not expected Pirithous Bind to work this well. Seth didn't know the strength of Solace, he couldn't see that much of the status, but even with the resistance of a boss, he seemed to struggle at first glance. An evil grin appeared on the bard's face, seeing the boss struggle on the ground. It seemed like Solar Solace was a caster type with little strength. Since he was light attributed, he was probably a cockroach, hard to damage and harder to kill, since he could just heal himself. Taking all this into account, the best part of Pirithous Bind was that it had no time limit. If the boss was unable to break free, he was stuck. This opened a whole new option to the bard. An audience that was forced to listen? What did you say again? I should sing? Since you asked for it, I will do just that. Your very personal little concert, he said with a big grin, sitting on a stone beside Solar Solace. Just don't blame me for what comes afterward. This won't end with you only dying. No, get away from me. What are you trying to do? The boss asked, panicky, as he saw a dark aura emitting from Seth's armor and the weird lyre in his hands. Tatzel, stay behind me and follow Ounce in the choir. Hush, child. The darkness will rise from the deep and carry you down into sleep. A high-pitched, almost angelic voice left the rough man's throat, accompanied by a dark tune from the floating pan pipes. Loyalty, loyalty. The ghostly voices of Tatzel and Ounce kept repeating as the darkness of the gorge above started encroaching on the shine of solar solace. The far-reaching shine like that was the sun shrank further and further. Guileless shit, I will shape your belief, and you will never know that I was the thief. From the ground below, shadows seeped up like liquid, swallowing the light and latching to the man's body. You won't understand the cause of your grief, but you will always follow the voices beneath. And no, stop this! Solace screeched, as the sticky blackness climbed up on him. Loyalty, 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 loyalty only to me. A bright explosion spread from solar solace and forced back the encroaching darkness, but it didn't faze Seth, nor Tatzel, or the instrument, as they were behind the bard protected by Apollo's shield. Solace was strong and resisted, but he still couldn't get up. Seth on the other hand had nothing to fear and intended to sing for as long as it took to break him. Hush, child. The darkness will rise from the deep and carry you down into sleep. Chapter 795 Pukdal the Rot. It's a shame I can't steal a living boss from the dungeon, the bard mumbled a few hours later. Yes, master. I wish I could follow you to the ends of the world. Solar Solace wept, kneeling at his feet. It had taken quite a lot of time and resources to convert the boss with a level in the triple digits, but ultimately it had no way to escape the bard angelic voice that wormed its way into the boss's brain. The only problem was that Solar Solace wouldn't be able to follow him. If he were to renounce his status and dungeon boss and dungeon master here to leave with Seth, he would die before leaving this dungeon by the means of his own faction. This only left them one way. Is this really the best way? Seth asked a little doubtful. Yes, as long as I don't resist, it will swiftly end my life, the boss confirmed it. Seth grabbed the massive man's shoulder with his right hand, where he wore Liseth, and activated the demonic debt, placing powerful curses of disease on the angel made of light. The spread of demonic power in his body was visible as if it infects his blood veins like a sepsis. The dark network quickly spread to his whole body and the bright light dimmed, becoming pale and lifeless like a corpse. I guess this is goodbye, Solace mumbled weakly. No, this is a see you later. I'm sure you will find a way to return you your master. Seeing Solar Solace so subservient, Seth actually grew a liking for the boss. Not to mention that he spent 6 hours serenading to it, to thoroughly wash its brain. He had to kill it here, but it didn't mean that his demonic suggestion would be released. The bard had paid souls to break his spirits, it better wouldn't be broken by simply dying. Yes, master. I will find a way back to you, it acknowledged its duty with its last gasp before it crumpled to pale specks of light, like ashes. Seth couldn't help to think, that its last somber smile fit its name a lot better than the arrogant attitude it had shown before. Ding! You have received the Pledge of Solace. Ding! You have killed Solar Solace Leave 135, boss, you have earned experience. A sudden notification told him as the last specks of Solar Solace vanished, just before he received his experience. For a moment he thought how easy it had been to kill a Leave 135 boss, but it was similar to his situation with Alzalsar. When the boss didn't resist and even helped in killing himself, the level didn't matter. Curious, he checked his status to find that he was at the cusp of leveling up, just short a sliver of experience. Solar Solace had really given me a lot of experience. The next thing that caught his eye was the Pledge of Solace. It wasn't a skill or a trait, but it was displayed in the same place as Mark of Ivice. Tisk, cheater! Stop collecting these! You only need the Mark of Ivice, Puffles said grumpily, when Seth told him that he got another Divine Friendship bracelet. At this point, Seth doubted that Solar Solace would escape the demonic brainwashing, not even through death. It was so strong that it even made the deity pledge its allegiance to him with its own power. Even if it somehow came to its sense later or was reverse mind-controlled, nothing could erase this pledge. All that was left was to out with everything you have. Tatzel, the size of a bus, was slowly scratching along the surface of the dungeon core with his pitch-black scales as he threatened to squeeze it. What flowed from the core was a sizable amount of gold, roughly 500 pieces, and a small bead glowing in a mysterious orange light. Sun bead, crafting material. Relic. 1 plus 200% power in bright places. 2 trait, Acolyte of the Sun. 3 plus 100% power to shadow magic. 4 plus 150% power to light magic. 5 plus 75% power to healing magic. 6 active skill, light shape. 7 active skill, resurrection. An orb with the powers of the sun, used by someone who had stepped on the path of legends. Once this bead becomes widely known or plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item has a high chance to become legendary. This was practically the mirror image of the Orb of Dusk he had gotten earlier. It was suspicious that this didn't drop from Solar Solace, but was spat out by the dungeon core. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Solar Solace to have and drop it? Maybe it was a drop for dungeons of this faction and Solace simply didn't droop his because he was lucky. He didn't drop a soul either. Good job, Tatzel. You can take 100 gold as an allowance. 500 gold was also a massive drop. On the other hand, if one thought of the difficulty of the dungeon, it really made more sense to come here for experience, than for the loot. Seth could make that much money when he threw a bunch of his casual products into the auction house. What about me? Puffles asked jealously. What about you? Did you do something today? I'm joking. You get the drops from the next dungeon we find. After all, it wasn't Puffles' fault that Seth and Tatzel wanted to monopolize the experience. Since both, Tatzel and Seth were a little tuckered out, he thought it was a good idea to let Puffles carry them through the next one. For a moment, Seth thought about giving the bead to Puffles, but he would rather make an item with it. He would later decide whether he would give that item to Puffles, or someone else. The problem was that Puffles was purely light-based. The option of shadow magic would be wasted on him, especially since Puffles was already strong enough as is. If anything, Seth would make him armor, not jewelry. Fine. I will show you that it was a mistake to not do so from the start. The Evisor agreed and they left the dungeon through the teleport formation that appeared after the boss died. They returned to the large network of natural caves. The cool, moist air and darkness actually felt really refreshing compared to the dry heat and light of the last 30 floors of the last dungeon. Seth took a deep breath and scowled. Do you smell this? It didn't smell like that before, right? No. I don't smell anything, Mom. Oh right, you guys are in your pet spaces. Puffles said sarcastically. Seth smelled a kind of rotten stench that had not been there before and followed it. Something out of the ordinary down here had to mean something. Oh look, it's undead. That's perfect for you, Puffles, he exclaimed when they found the source of the stench, which was a cavern full of rotting flesh monsters. There were hundreds of elite undead above level 90 and several bosses, one having a level in the triple digits. Did a dungeon break while they were busy in another one? Or maybe they were ready to conquer another dungeon down here and amassed their troops for that. One way or the other, suddenly a huge beam of blazing light split the cavern, vaporizing anything in its way. The menacing crowd of dead that resisted death looked to the ceiling of the cavern, where the nightmare centipede had already readied its next spell, bombing the whole cavern in a rain of smaller rays. Ding! Your party has killed Pukdal the Rot level 99, boss, you have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now level 95. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Chapter 796 Carbonized for the most part. Fungus Dungeon. Is everyone okay? Bulko asked, vomiting a fountain of blood. His body was covered in a dashing suit of fire-resistant armor, but his body seemed broken despite the armor being just fine. His eyes, red from ruptured veins, scanned the surrounding ash fields. At the last second, he had managed to change his equipment, cast a barrier, and the skill damage mirror. The latter was part of his skills as a mirror priest. It's allowed him to reflect part of the damage his party suffered, in exchange for him alone suffering greater damage. His skin was parched and ripped with every movement, while his insides felt cooked. Despite the power of the armor, he had taken a huge amount of fire damage. Currently, his health was teetering below 100, but he didn't care. His soft tissue may fall off, but his thick bones were still fine. He wasn't dying, so he started looking for his party. At his call, a massive amount of ashes started moving as bright rays of light broke through it. The next moment the ashes fell to the ground. Among the ashes was the tiny Finn, unconscious. It seemed like she had grown to giant size and threw herself in front of the priest's barrier, to take the brunt of the explosion. Her back was covered in terrifying burns and her health was slowly trickling away. Finn! Bulko exclaimed, frightened, but his own body was also close to breaking down. only making a few steps before falling on the ground, some distance away from her. He struggled to get up again when he saw what he stumbled over. Lixis also didn't look so fresh anymore. The elementalist had also lost consciousness, facing the consequences of her own actions. However, her situation was stable. Before the priest could crawl further, another 2 mounds of ashes rose, Mike and Mina. They didn't look good either. The cat assassin's left arm was weirdly twisted, with her hand completely mangled. Her right leg was also pointed in an unnerving direction. Her health had fallen to about a third. Mike looked a little better. Outwardly only his arm was broken, but his health was at roughly 50%, meant that he probably had a bunch of internal injuries that would make it hard for him to fight. Shit, Bulko. What happened to you? Mike exclaimed. Finn? Is that Finn? What happened to you too? Mina's eyes first focus on Finn, before technically repeating Mike's question in sync. PFF, you two are really brother and sister. Mina, didn't you mention that your blessing could also heal? Could you maybe? Bulko coughed. Oh, yes. Of course. Mina said hurriedly. Since they had 2 healers in their party, Sekomet's aspect of healing usually didn't get a big chance to shine. Especially since it couldn't really compare to Finn's and Bulko's skills, which were specialized in healing. Like the plague aspect only being a side effect of her attacks, the healing aspect was not as miraculous as one would have hoped. Glowing with golden light, her hands hovered over Bulko and the unconscious fairy, as she kneeled between the two. The dim golden light encased the two and started improving their healing speed. The power could also cure all kinds of diseases, but unlike most system skills, it needed some time to take effect. What about Lixis? Mike asked, naturally taking a stance and bringing out his pet to guard the 4, while his eyes scanned the ashen desert surrounding them. She will be okay, Bulko said and started explaining his own state as his breathing slowly became smoother under Mina's treatment. Finn's back also showed signs of recovery, as her health stopped falling. Overall, their party was in terrible shape, with 2 of the members unconscious and the other 3 heavily wounded. Still, with some time Mina would be able to help the 2 priests recover. Bulko could regenerate some of his mana with a potion and help her fix Finn. If only they had that time. The 2 heard Mike curse behind them. Mina turned, while Bulko could only carefully try to look in that direction. In the far distance, an ash-grey dune had suddenly started slowly moving. In their direct. You have to be kidding me. Mike mumbled in disbelief, voicing everyone's thoughts. The boss still wasn't dead and was moving towards them. It had to be the boss. What else would have survived that spell? They all paled. There was no way they could survive an encounter with the 3 of them, no matter how hurt the boss was. Mike, take the girls and run, Bulko tried to stand up. It was clear that he wanted to buy time for Mike and the girls to get further away, however, a soft hand grabbed his forehead and rudely pushed him back to the ground. Shut up, Mina whispered, and a pitch-black darkness filled the world before Bulko's eyes. He could see absolutely nothing anymore. If it wasn't for the pain in his body, he would have thought his soul had left him for the great void. Mina had used Erebus to hide them in a dome of absolute darkness. They just needed time. The boss wouldn't be able to easily find them in here. With some luck, it would buy enough time for either of their healers to recover enough to help everyone. Only Mina could see in this place. She could see Mike nervously grasping his sword. She could see Lixis, still soundly lying on the ground after creating this huge mess. Her heart ached, seeing the states Finn and Bulko were in through the scope of the dark domain. In this place, she didn't see with her eyes or other senses, but with something like a sense of darkness. It showed her all the cuts, bruises, and wounds her companions had suffered in excruciating detail. If they were the enemy, it would have been great weak points, but seeing her friendly like this, it was hard to endure. She also saw outside the dome. Mina was able to see the mold mound approach. It hadn't gotten away unscathed either. It looked carbonized for the most part. Covered in ash, it limped toward the dome. Its big red eye was gouged out and dark, but there were many tiny ones, all fixed at her, no, at the dome of darkness that had appeared in this twilight landscape. Bulko and Mike were nervous, the boss was approaching and they had suddenly lost all vision. Both jumped when Mina suddenly laughed out loud. Dave Fugue? Mina, what are you doing? Isn't the boss? Ding! Your party has killed Abominable Mold Mound. Leave 97, boss, you have earned experience. They heard the announcement. Mina inadvertently laughed out, when her tense nerves suddenly relaxed. She had observed the boss the whole time, but when it was about to reach the boundary of her darkness, it suddenly flopped over. Like a man that died of thirst, it simply fell over, face first in the ashes, and died from the plague. The party let out a collective sigh of relief, as Mike also fell on his butt, laughing. Even Bulko couldn't help laughing, even though every laugh hurt. It was the sweet release, right after the tension of almost losing their lives. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now level 94. Chapter 797 Uncle Olaf. What should we do now? Mike asked into the round. It had been 2 hours since the boss just keeled over and died. In the meantime, Mina had managed to keep everyone alive. Once Bulko had recovered enough health and mana, he healed Finn, who in turn helped the others recover once she was awake. Lixis also woke up somewhere in between. She was hurt, but her unconsciousness stemmed from the mana deficiency after casting a meteor. They sat in a circle and ate special meals prepared by Link, to recover their fatigue and other resources. Now that everyone was awake and recovering, Mike saw it fit to talk about the party's next step. I want to leave, Lixis stated openly. We lack preparations for this kind of dungeon and we barely beat this time's boss. But most importantly, I really dislike this place. It's dirty, it's dangerous, and the mobs are disconcerting to the max. It finally broke out of Lixis. Her expression was one of shame and sadness. She had hidden it so far because she was embarrassed, but now she showed how distressed she was by the dungeon. The party listened to her with serious expressions. They all knew how strong Lixis was usually, but everyone had their weakness. To them, it explained her sudden and extreme reaction, to cast meteor. Unsure, the half-elf looked at the others, who stayed silent for a moment, after she finished speaking. I'm in favor of leaving. Even if it means we return all the way back to Delta. To everyone's surprise, it was the rabid dog of the party, Finn, that would not forego a tough challenge, that voiced her agreement to return first. Especially since she said it in a serious manner, instead of her cutesy act. She offered Lixis, who staring at her in disbelief, a warm smile. The others followed suit. Yes, I also think we have gotten far enough for now. Level 94 isn't bad at all and we can return at any time now. Bulko said with a chuckle. I also want to go home. Cleaning magic is good and all, but I want a bath, Mina spoke languidly, stretching her limbs. Alright then. Since we don't know whether it will work here, we should all use the skill at the same time, Mike concluded the discussion. At his words, the other four were stumped for a moment. They had totally forgotten that home call may not even work. Lixis stared at the party leader with big tearful eyes, that clearly blamed him for reminding her of the possibility that they might be stuck here until they cleared the dungeon, or died. On 3, 2, 1 home call. Fortunately for Lixis, the whole party vanished from her nightmare dungeon. Theater dimension. That makes one party that pulled out without dying, the system god teased his competitor. But they also only gained 4 levels, the dungeon god barked back grumpily. Huge gains if you ask me, the other said with a shrug. But not enough to enter the last stretch. Just a matter of time. Let's just keep watching. The system god ended their banter and they returned their attention to the screens. Elemental dungeon. The gates of the boss room opened with the death of Maltus and the masses of water shot into the tunnels outside. The ripping torrents almost ripped them off their field, when several shields opened and helped them stand their ground. Good thinking, Allison. Both times, Monique patted the wizard on her back. It had been Allison's idea to tunnel out of the barrier, using earth magic and using the empty barrier as bait, while they stayed hidden in the water using the water-breathing potion. The hardest part was enduring the pressure and the uncertainty since they could really see anything in the murky water. Hearing the boss had died was the warning they needed, just before the torrents almost swept them off their feet. Everyone had gained a little less than 10% experience from the boss fight. Let's get loot and look for the next boss, the chosen of Athena said, and went to the place where Maltus perished. The boss who had turned into a burning figure had turned into a heap of ashes underwater. The ashes were gone, but by the courtesy of the system, the loot was still in the same place. There was an orange crystal and a metal piece that looked like a small flame, which would probably fit into one of the recesses of the door they found. Only 3 more to go. It can only get easier from here, and Shay, don't use that ring in a closed room ever again. Okay, the water mage said meagerly. Do you really think we can do it? Maltus was already quite hard, despite us having the elemental advantage, Ray asked a little worried. The next one would be the water-based boss, right? Do we have enough water-breathing potions? Jonah asked Allison, their resident alchemist. Well, I have enough to keep everyone breathing for 1 hour underwater, if we face the same situation as just now, Allison said after checking her inventory. Shay, do you think aquakinesis would work on the attacks of the boss? Tekker interjected with a sudden idea. If the water mage could bend the attacks of the boss, they could get another advantage. However, Shay shook his head. I can barely manipulate my own magic with my current stats. I don't know whether Level 5 would even be high enough to manipulate the magic of someone else, he explained uncertainly. Don't worry, I'm sure we will be able to manage. Let's find it first, Monique changed the subject. Climbing back up, their wandering around the system of tunnel restarted. Once again, they had to search for a gate that had to have appeared somewhere. Ugh, we have been looking for a full hour. Can't we just... Found it? Ray was interrupted by Shay's call. Everyone followed his voice and found the water mage standing in front of a gate made of opaque ice. My educated guess would be, this boss will be frost-themed, Allison commented the obvious, as they stood in front of the door. She continued to bring out a few potion bottles. Here, everyone drink it. It will raise your frost resistance by 15% for the next hour, she explained to the light blue potion that looked like an energy drink. Okay, let's have a look at what's inside, Monique said and entered, once everyone downed the potions. The freezing cold door swung open under a light push of her hands. Past it was a glacial cave with a white, polished floor made of ice. In the middle of this boss room, opposite them, stood a small stocky figure. It was like an ugly gnome with bright blue skin and a white beard. The whole party hesitated for a moment. Uncle of Frost, Olaf Leave -- Their appraisal skills told them, that it was a boss with a level in the 3 digits, but as a boss, it looked very underwhelming, compared to Maltus, a hulk made of lava and fire. The small, bent-over gnome didn't seem to be fazed by their sudden entry. Guests? And it seems like you managed to beat Maltus. Interesting, Olaf spoke with a high voice. Should I test him out? Jonah asked carefully. They had followed Shay's strategy before since drowning Maltus was the easiest way to win, at least it was what they suspected. The gnome didn't look like much of a melee fighter, so it was probably a caster. In that case, Jonah saw a good chance to be able to beat it, relying on the effects of the Sword of Chains. HOH? You alone want to challenge me? How fun, then come, the eavesdropping boss told him. At Monique's nod, the swordsman charged forward. Suddenly, the icy dwarf faced the cold beauty of the face of deception. Jonah used the fearful evil eye when he was close enough, really stunning the gnome for a moment. Divine chains. Breaking from the ground were chains of dull grey metal that tied the gnome like snakes. With the boss caught, Jonah got ready to swing his sword, when he heard something shatter. Chapter 798 Wyberian's Sneeze. Jonah's eyes opened wide when he suddenly lost him and he heard the party gasp from behind. Get away from him, Jonah, he heard Monique's words, but he had already reacted. Using the sword as a lever he smacked the ground and catapulted himself backward, away from the gnome, who was still bound by grey chains. However, from the corner of his eyes, he already saw frost building up on the divine chains. What he also saw was a foot with a shattered ankle, stuck to the ground. His heart dropped a little. That was his foot and it still wore his boot. He had not felt anything but lost a limb while charging at Olaf. Are you okay, Jonah? Monique asked, glancing at him as he returned. Yet. I just lost my boot. Give me a moment to recover, he said casually. They all knew that Jonah already had a terrifying regeneration ability due to his class. The item he had been given by Seth further strengthened this power, but the powers he got from Munera put the icing on the cake. Beauty without blemishes, they heard him whisper almost inaudibly. Quicker than they could perceive, the frozen, splintery stump of his foot had vanished. Instead, there was a beautiful slender foot, as if carved from jade by a master sculptor. He quickly hid the work of art in a spare boot. Jonah was able to completely recover from injury, as long as he was not in combat. He was able to fully recover even in combat, once a day. Olaf didn't even twitch during Jonah's magic show, just standing in the middle of the boss room, unmoving. However, when he saw Jonah look toward him, he shook himself just a little, the chains that held him crumbled away like brittle dust. From Jonah's move, they knew that there was a trick to this boss. It wasn't imposing, or frightening at first glance, but it hid terrifying secrets behind its plain facade. The next moment a row of fireballs the size of soccer balls shot toward Olaf. Again, the gnome didn't attempt to evade, instead, the fireballs started growing slower and smaller in size, vanishing just before the meager flames that were left could touch him. I see, I think I understand it now. This guy has some kind of frost aura ability that grows gradually stronger the closer something gets. That means we are at a time limit. Allison concluded. A time limit? Ray asked. I think I know what Allison means. Jonah managed to endure getting closer, but suddenly his foot was flash frozen when he got too close. Even if the gnome's aura is fixed, he is constantly lowering the temperature around him, dispersing freezing air that sinks to the ground and will fill the room at some point. Shay, the water and ice mage, was the second to understand Allison's concerns. Then we should make pillars, Tecker suddenly suggested, making everyone look at him in surprise. Why are you looking at me like that? It's simple physics that cold air flows down. Since we can't fly, Allison could use earth magic to create pillars for you to stand on. I could take a while. It could take a while? What are you saying, Tecker? Monique asked, surprised. He is the perfect opponent. An enemy that can't move is perfect for me, and even if he can, I will make sure he can't in a minute. I will keep him down and you guys will look for a way to whittle down his health, the tank said confidently. He was motivated to finally be able to do his job as a tank. The whole dungeon had forced him into the role of a mobile fortification, because of the weird elemental enemies. When they faced Maltus, his chance was robbed of him by Shay. No, the big man's hands were itching for some action. Monique stared at the bulwark of defense for a moment, before she nodded. Ray, layer all the buffs you have on Tecker. Allison, can I leave the pillars to you? Sure, she answered Monique, before bringing out 2 potion bottles. Tecker, take these. This one can temporarily improve all of your attributes and this one can raise your frost resistance by 25%. Both last for half an hour, the alchemist sent the tank off with another dose of doping. Tecker smiled at both, seeing the cold wizard care for him, and the effect of the potion. Tecker had already maxed out his skill basic resistance up, which gave him a 75% resistance to all basic elements. With the addition of 25% buff, his resistance to from was above 90%. Now he was even less afraid of the boss. With a smirk, he lifted his massive shield. With his hand was tightly wrapped around the pipe, he walked towards the boss who was around half his size. The group had been whispering something among themselves before finally, the massive hulk in his thick armor started stomping toward Olaf. The gnome didn't care. There were many who thought they could rely on their defense to overcome his frost. They all had turned into nice decorative statues in his personal abode. HOH, you are sending the big guy now. Do you think he has a better chance? He mocked them, amused. What is that stick you are carrying? Maybe you shouldn't wear such a heavy armor when you need a walking stick for it. The walking mountain of metal did not answer and just kept getting close with steady steps. Not much of a talker, I see. You must be fun on celebrations. Olaf furrowed his brows, when the tank stepped into the range of the spreading freezing air, without so much as slowing down. Some frost built up on the surface of his boot, but that was all. Humph, seems like you can endure better than your speedy friend. But it won't help you. Olaf started quick casting icicle spells and shooting them at the walking wall, to stop his advance. Even if he had a huge defense, Olaf's ice was special. He could block it, but it would just build up on his opponent, slowly encasing him in a shell of cursed ice. He cast the in quick succession, but his expectations were soon betrayed. As planned, the oaf simply lifted his massive shield, but instead of building up, the ice shattered away at the barrier created the moment he held his shield in front of him. The boss could also feel a cold energy flow through him after each hit. Frost magic couldn't damage him, but made a mental note when he realized that the man approaching reflected part of the damage he received back at him. Olaf frowned even harder when he saw what the rest of the man's party was up to. Their wizards were raising pillars of stone to evade the rising cold on the floor. It was a good idea, but... Did you think I will let you? He said with a sneer. Olaf ignored the approaching man and started firing his icicles at the party, standing on stone pillars. He just had to hit end, or make them fall, then they would be done for. At that point, the tank would also despair and... An ear-shattering cry suddenly rattled his brain. It was so high and shrill that he feared his skull bursting. The sound filled him with unbridled rage, as his eyes fixed on the armor approaching him. With a vengeance, Olaf started firing spells at the man, slowly walking towards him. Icicles, shards, spikes, ice walls, he even summoned a blizzard on the man, yet he kept calmly walking through all hindrances. Sometimes it was magic from his friend that would break the obstacles or directly hit him. Especially the weird aura spears were annoying, but he ignored them. The armor, that hateful thing, was approaching. It had to die. He had to kill it even if it cost him his life. Slowly Olaf regained his calm, confused about his former state of mind. He was covered in wounds. It was nothing serious yet, he just had to go to the next phase and move. The chamber was already filled to half with deadly frost. There was no need to stay still anymore. He made an attempt to move but too late. Allod's destiny. He heard a deep voice say and received a painful smack to the head. They hit him with his metal cane and he suddenly felt an invisible force, like vipers, tie him up and bind his body while sucking away at his life force. The damage was negligible, but the binding force was terrifying and unaffected by his frost. Ding! You have been affected by Alloyd's bind. Duration 8 minutes. -3 health per second. He didn't have the time to process the information. Arg! My knee! Another strike hit him right in the left knee. Together with the pain, he also felt an evil power invade his body. The next strike hit his right knee and another wave of evil power spread through him. Now he could feel it like a weight on his whole body. Ding! You have been affected by Curse of Burden. Stack 2. He couldn't even scream, when he was suddenly silent, right after the tank went for his crotch. Ding! You have been affected by Random Curse, Pain Amplification. Duration, 3 minutes. Olaf could only cry tears of blood as he was peppered in a storm of cheap shots while he couldn't move. He knew that the attacks barely made any damage, but the last curse made everything worse. As he kept hitting him like a maniac, more curses accumulated. Ding! You have been affected by Random Curse, Damage Willpower. Duration, 5 minutes. Your willpower is lowered by 20 points. Ding! You have been affected by Random Curse, Wyberion's Sneeze. Duration, 30 seconds. Now he was caught in a 30-second sneeze attack while being beaten with a metal cane. Ding! You have been affected by Sleep Paralysis. Duration, 5 minutes. Everything went dark. He almost expected the sweet release of unconsciousness, but it wasn't. He was just blind and he couldn't move anymore. His body didn't listen to his thoughts and he was forced to endure the pain. His ears were filled with confusing noise and an unfounded feeling of fear rose from his stomach to his throat. Oh, God! Chapter 799 Dragos Cernat. Held down by Tekker and shot by the others, Olaf really suffered a death by 1,000 beatings. The effects of the potion were yet to run out when the boss finally breathed his last breath and rewarded them with roughly 10% experience each. When the gnome shattered into a heap of ice shards, it also left the water key for the door on the lowest floor and a deep blue crystal, fitting the one Maltus had dropped previously. They took a break to discuss. During its death, they found out that Olaf was Leve 105, lower than Maltus. If that stayed true, the Earth boss may not even be above level 100. With that in mind, they went to search for the Earth boss after a break. As expected, the Earth boss had nothing going for it besides its overwhelming defense. That didn't help it much against the two melees chosen Jonah and Monique. It dropped a dark crystal and the third key for the door. It was actually the last and supposedly weakest boss that had them hesitating. The airheads had been the biggest headache for the party because of the invisible attacks that could even circumvent the protection of their armor. Without Tekker's cover, they might not have gotten past the meadow. However, when they returned to the surface, the meadow was gone. It was a burned-down wasteland like a firestorm had devastated the whole place. The few trees they had seen before were uprooted and charred. The grass was gone, only leaving a hilly plain of ashes and brown, dry dirt. Hello, little birdies. I finally found some of you. It's a shame I don't see that annoying armored guy among you, but you will do just fine. A cold, cruel voice said playfully. Dragos Cernat Leve -- Theater Dimension. Looks like at least one team is in trouble, the dungeon god gloated. It doesn't count if they don't die by a dungeon resident, the system god argued back. Our bet is only whether they die in the dungeons. We never specified by whom or how, they said strictly. So that's how you want to play this, the system god asked poisonously. Hey now. It's not like I interfered to make this happen. It's all the consequences of their own actions. You know that as much as I do. Humph. Just you wait. Don't underestimate the little blacksmith. Giant fortress. While Lydia's bongkenning returned the undead to the afterlife, the rest of the party roped down. As great of a spectacle as the autonomous bats were, their eyes were glued to the giant skeleton that kept exuding the dark miasma that brought the dirt to life and was trying to squeeze into their little niche beside the stairs. In its struggle, it kept waving the broken sword around, but it simply didn't have the reach to get close to them. Colossal Crypt Walker Leave - Elite. Just what kind of place had they fallen to, that even the elite mobs were already in the triple digits? As the clobbering of the masses slowly came to an end, Ferdinand was busy healing Jess and James. They survived, but they were in a sorry state, needing the priest to cast several spells to quickly recover their peak shape. "How do you feel?" he asked the couple who had fallen silent for a while he was healing them. "A lot better, thank you, Ferdinand," James said, still a little distracted. "Is really everything all right?" Lydia asked when she finally put away the bat. There were no undead respawning. It seemed like the trash heap was finally desolate of remnants. It just... Jess hesitated and looked James in the eyes. The couple nodded. "We were finally chosen," they said in sync with insecure smiles. On top of gaining the classes of Clinker's Paladin and Spirit of Lohe, they had also become the saints of the god couple's religion. They were still overwhelmed by the rows of skills they had gained, but also the sudden responsibility. Being a chosen was just a sponsorship without responsibilities, but being a saint was different, and it was hard for them to grasp what to do from now on. "Don't worry about that stuff. We will definitely help you with that stuff when we get out of here. Try to concentrate on the now, we will need you when we want to get out of here," Lydia calmed them down. She was sure Minasmar would help the two in this endeavor. The rest of the party also agreed warmly, calming the two down by a lot. The most interesting aspect of their new classes was probably the effects Jess had on James. He gained several improvements based on the distance between them. James got the trait of Clinker's love. This was based on Clinker's relationship with Lohe. Klinger was the god of stone and metal. If he was away from his love, he would harden, and when he got closer to her he would melt from heated love. Mirroring this, the further the paladin was away from her, the greater his defense would become. If he was closer to her, the defense buff would fall, but his attack and speed would increase. Jess on the other hand gained the trait, Lohe's care. All her fire skills were able to heal James. She had gained more skills she could use to help and buff her comrades, and all of them would have double the effect on Clinker's Paladin. While Jess gained skills that allowed her to double as a supporter, James was pushed further into the direction of a dedicated tank, from his former disposition as a warrior doubling as a tank. "Thank you, Lydia, everyone," Jess finally said, relieved. "Yes, thanks guys," James added. "Okay, do you think you are ready to try some of those new skills? We should start trying to get out of here, first," Lydia said with an encouraging smile, pointing with her thumb at the giant skeleton behind them. "All right. Let's start with this," Jess exclaimed, jumping up and started chanting. Blessing of Lohe, she ended her chant and a warm aura enveloped everyone in the party. It was golden, with an orange hue. It was an overall recovery buff that relieved fatigue and improved health regeneration. But it also gave them a slight divine protection, that relieved the pressure of the miasma surrounding them. It said there were more effects, once her proficiency increased. Following her example, Ferdinand also started to cast his blessing on the long-ranged party members. They didn't talk long about the strategy to clear the way. It was a silent consensus that they wouldn't do something stupid like getting close to the skeleton. They had two chosen archers, a chosen fire mage, and a powerful lightning mage. They simply bombarded the undead with all kinds of skills. Undead were not very intelligent, which was the reason it had been trying to squeeze in for so long, but they were not stupid enough to stay still while being killed. After several painful hits by divine attacks and lightning strikes, the massive crypt walker pulled away from the niche. "Should we go after it?" Phaenis asked. "No, we can't see its health, but it didn't seem like we did a lot of damage. These colossi really have a tremendous health, and I doubt this thing is any weaker than what we might face when we go to the very top," Lydia answered ponderingly. Although she was interested to see if they could take down the giant with a level above 100, it was stupid to charge into such a dangerous place without any knowledge of the floor's overall power level. Maybe that thing was the weakest creature they would encounter. If they pursued it and faced something even stronger, just two of those could be troublesome in open combat. Let's climb back up the rope and try our luck on one of the easier floors first. We should give Jess and James some time to get used to their new status before we risk our lives. Lydia finally decided. Although Phaenis was a little bummed, they all understood that it was the smarter course of action for now. Even Jess and James, who had every right to hold a grudge, were rather glad that Lydia believed in them, and gave them a chance to test their new skills first. One by one the party clambered back up the rope, seeking an easier challenge to train. This was not a cowardly escape, not even a strategic retreat, it was a dagger pinning a note to the door, that they would be back at a later date. At least they felt a lot better about it, thinking of it this way. Chapter 800 The Last Stretch. Quest, The Last Stretch. Congratulations, player. You have reached Level 95. Now, only a small step is separating you from transcending mortal confines and entering the path of legends. All system restrictions on spoilers are lifted. You have met the conditions to transcend, as such you receive this quest and the opportunity to prepare for the future. You can now view the list of domains you have unlocked. As a special right, you are given the opportunity to use your current skill set and create a unique class as your legacy for other players. Starting at Level 100 you will begin your journey to become a legend. And the system will cease all active assistance. With best regards, the System God. Quest Goal, reach Level 100 and choose your path. Quest Reward, Item Slots, System Upgrade. You cannot refuse this quest. Seth stared at the quest window for a long time, while Puffles was massacring the smelly army that filled the wide cavern. The window didn't really tell him anything new. It mostly confirmed what he expected. There was a new stage past Level 100 and it had to do with becoming a legend. The problem was that the quest description didn't really reveal anything about how it worked. How was he going to transcend mortal confines? Was there a special meaning behind creating a unique class he wouldn't be able to use? And what did it mean when the system ceased all active assistance? Since the reward was item slots and system upgrades, it wouldn't mean that he lost the system rights and status windows he had, right? On one hand, Seth was interested in what was about to come, on the other he was very frustrated with the current lack of information. Now Seth understood why Lena and Beemont had offered him to explain. Even the system told him to prepare, although it didn't tell him how he was supposed to prepare. At least all spoiler restrictions were lifted, now Lena would be able to answer all his questions. Oh, right. It mentioned that, he thought, seeing another window button in his status menu called Domains. He had been so stuck in his thoughts that he forgot that the quest mentioned that, too. Maybe this could tell him what domains were. Opening the window, he found it showed a neat list of several different titles, some being able to expand with an explanation, others being grayed out and inaccessible. The three at the top of the list that were not grayed out were Legendary Blacksmith, Legendary Goldsmith, Architect of Life. The rest of the list was filled with options that were grayed out, like Legendary Enchanter, Calamity of Fire, Legendary Craftsman, Forger of Legends, Rhyme Caster, Wordsmith. Surrounded by explosions of light, heat, and rotten meat, Seth started clicking through the option to maybe find out why so many were shown but grayed out. Legendary Blacksmith. All items made using the Blacksmith skill will gain a basic bonus based on the level of existence. Relic-rated items will automatically upgrade after completion. Relic-rated items have a chance to upgrade to Legendary before attaining the status of a legend. The chance increases with the level of existence. The domain allows the bearer to use the power of existence to artificially improve aspects of the items one made. Can be used to upgrade the rating of items one made. The improvement will give a bonus to basic stats, attack, defense, durability, and enchantments can be strengthened using the power of existence. Achievements needed to unlock: 1. Blacksmith Master. 2. The creation of a legendary item using the Blacksmith skill. Seth had no idea what level of existence and power of existence were supposed to be, but the legendary Goldsmith showed exactly the same options as the legendary Blacksmith, but based on the Goldsmith skill. The last of the three was a little different. Architect of Life. All your creations such as golems, automatons, or artificial life forms receive a bonus to their basic stats. Any creation close to becoming a legend upon creation has a chance to be born as a legend. The chance increases with the level of existence. 90% after becoming a legend. The domain allows the bearer to use existential power to further improve specific skills or traits of a creation. Achievements needed to unlock: Title: Creator. A creation with the potential to become a legend. All three of them had in common that he seemingly achieved the prerequisites to attain them. The logical conclusion was that the ones shown, but grayed out, were only partially unlocked. This explained why there were so many. Unfortunately, Seth couldn't see what exactly he was missing to unlock them, he could only guess at best. For example, the reason why he couldn't choose to be a legendary enchanter. He bet it was the same as for the other two, to have mastered the skill and created a legendary item with enchantment. The last point was the important one. Seth had always used the skill to learn and use enchantments, but the focus of an enchanter as a class was the creation of enchantments. He guessed that one needed to either create a legendary enchantment or create a legendary item only using the enchantment. This was something he, as a blacksmith, couldn't manage to do. So far most of his legendary items relied on the materials used, which was legit for a blacksmith. But for enchantment, it would need to be legendary, independently from the material used. At least, this was his guess. In a similar way, he guessed that all the musically based were not unlocked because he was not a master singer, nor was he a master in instrument mastery. On the other hand, he had a bunch of titles that had to do with music and could explain why these options appeared. In some way or the other, the grayed out options were lacking something to be unlocked. But Seth couldn't check what they were actually lacking, since he couldn't expand those options. Was this maybe what the system meant by preparing? Maybe there was a way to find out what he was lacking and the system informed him that he still had the chance to find out and maybe unlock a path he liked better? Because, if he was honest, the current titles were too restrictive for his taste. On that note, some of them had quite generic names, like just the class with legendary glued in front of it. Maybe these were basic options? If anyone with the achievements could unlock these paths, maybe this was what Lena wanted to talk with him? If these paths were not unique, but fixed routes, Krina might have information about the paths and achievements needed to unlock. I'm done here, Puffles informed him proudly. Seth looked up from his domain window to face a field of slaughter. The whole cavern was drenched in rotten blood, ashed and burned bodies all mixing into a disgusting sludge. While he was preoccupied with his own business, the Eye-Visor, and shown no mercy. As if reading his thoughts, Puffles started posing, presenting himself squeaky clean. With all the disgusting stuff littering the cave floor, the Eye-Visor had not gotten hit by even a drop of blood. Not to mention that there wasn't a single scratch on his carapace. Puffles, the mighty Leave 168. Looking at Puffles like this, Seth's mouth fell wide open when he used Thia's discerning eyes and was finally able to see his pet's level. His little, arrogant, baby Eye-Visor was already closing in on the level Alzalsar was when Seth first met her when she was still a lich. No wonder he had no problem wiping the floor with that army of undead here. Although Seth was relatively disillusioned when faced with his own options to become a legend and came to believe that the level of a legend was not necessarily equivalent to the individual fighting strength, he didn't doubt for a second that it was the case for individuals like Puffles or Al. There was no doubt that there were paths that would lead to huge improvements in fighting power. Looking at his own list, something like Calamity of Fire sounded like he could become a menace on a continental level if he stepped on that path. Architect of Life also had some mean potential, taking into account that it would add to what he was already capable of. What wasn't to Seth's taste about this path, was that he technically became a mob spawner. There was nothing wrong about being a mob spawner, it could be really powerful. In fact, he already was one. However, if he took the next great step, the blacksmith felt that he would have wanted a path that allowed him to further his own passion. Even though he had only become a blacksmith for the past 3 years, his passion for making things was actually burning brightly. Something like legendary craftsman, which sounded like it could improve everything he already had, sounded more enticing to him. It also reminded him of Hephaestus, who was mainly the god of blacksmiths, but also the god of all craftsmen. Seth? Are you all right? Should we rest? Puffles said in a surprising moment of care. Mom. Seeing Puffles' level had thrown Seth back into a stream of thoughts, worrying his companions. Oh, no, everything's all right. I just got a quest that made me think about a lot of stuff, he calmed them. Let's rest and talk about it, Puffles said after a moment. The group walked back into the tunnel, where the stench of the battlefield wasn't so struck, and set up their camp to eat and talk.